Phone call verification, best practices for compliance. Why phone call verification is now a revenue requirement. Outbound calling is still one of the fastest ways to create pipeline, but it's working against a trust environment that has collapsed. In 2024 alone, U.S. consumers received 52.8 billion robocalls, and roughly half were categorized as likely unwanted. So your prospect's default assumption is that an unknown number is risky, not relevant. That shift shows up directly in connect rates. Studies report that 74% of consumers don't answer unknown numbers due to scam fears, and 80% actively block numbers they don't recognize, meaning even perfectly legitimate B2B cold calling services can get filtered or ignored if caller identity and intent aren't obvious. Phone call verification is how a modern SDR agency turns hope they pick up into an operational system you can measure, audit, and improve. When we build calling programs at SalesHive, we treat identity, consent, and carrier reputation as core infrastructure, not a rep-by-rep habit. Compliance pressure is rising, and the consequences are real. Compliance isn't just legal hygiene, it's a business control. Do not call and telemarketing violations can carry penalties up to $50,120 per illegal call, and the reputational fallout often costs more than the fine because it poisons deliverability, dialing performance, and brand trust. At the same time, carriers are getting stricter about what traffic deserves to ring through. Stir-shaken call authentication has helped reduce unwanted robocalls by about 60% since 2019, and that's pushed the market toward an expectation that legitimate businesses will authenticate calls and manage their originating numbers like a real asset. The compliance bar is also rising because the fraud problem keeps expanding. About 70% of consumers report receiving at least one impersonation call in a recent 3-month window, which explains why recipients, carriers, and regulators increasingly treat unverified calling patterns as suspicious by default. What phone call verification actually means in B2B outbound. In a B2B sales agency context, phone call verification isn't one feature, it's a layered framework. You're verifying the phone number itself. Is it valid and reachable? The caller's identity. Is this really your business? The recipient's permissions and preferences. Can you call and should you? And the purpose of the call. Does the script and flow match what's allowed? The most common mistake we see in outsourced sales team builds is treating verification as a dialer setting rather than a workflow that starts in list-building services and ends with clean activity logging. If consent lives in one spreadsheet, DNC lives somewhere else, and the dialer pulls from a third system, reps will accidentally bypass safeguards, especially under quota pressure. A simple way to operationalize this is to define each verification layer, who owns it, and how it is proven later. That clarity is what keeps B2B cold calling services compliant while still moving fast. Building the verification stack: CRM, dialer, numbers, and logging. Start with centralized consent and suppression in your CRM, because every downstream system will inherit whatever mess lives there. Standardize fields for consent status, consent source, last verified date, and internal DNC opt-out. Then sync those fields to your dialer so campaigns cannot include contacts marked revoked, DNC, or outside allowed call windows. Next, treat outbound numbers like production infrastructure. Register a clean pool of numbers, enable authenticated calling where possible, and warm volumes gradually so you don't trigger carrier analytics that lead to scam-likely labeling. The fastest way to burn a number is to spike volume on day one, ignore complaint signals, and assume a new number will magically fix a reputation problem. Finally, make logging non-negotiable. Every opt-out needs to be captured the same way, in the same place, and synced everywhere, because we honor opt-outs only matters if you can prove it. For sales outsourcing programs, internal or external, this is where compliance becomes real. Accurate records, consistent dispositions, and a clear audit trail tied to calls and recordings. If you can't prove who you are, why you're calling, and that you'll stop when asked, you don't have a calling program. You have a liability. Rep-level best practices that keep calls compliant and more answered. Verification fails most often in the first 10 seconds of the call. We recommend opening with clear identification, company name, a plain English purpose, and a respectful exit path so the recipient can opt out without friction. When that language is practiced, it doesn't sound like legalese, it sounds professional, which is exactly what reduces complaints. Train cold callers to treat opt-outs as a process, not a mood. The mistake is debating or delaying. The correct move is to confirm the request, record it immediately, and ensure it updates the suppression logic across systems. That discipline protects your team from repeat contact risk and protects your numbers from negative feedback loops that hurt answer rates. It's also where performance improves. Branded caller ID has been reported to lift answer rates by up to 56% compared to unbranded calls, and some enterprises report results of 100% plus improvement when they add verified name and call reason, meaning compliance-forward identity signals can be a direct lever for meetings booked. Common mistakes that trigger spam labels and compliance risk. The most expensive mistakes are usually operational, not intentional. Teams forget to synchronize suppression across tools, allow reps to import ad hoc lists, or run campaigns without enforcing local calling windows, creating inconsistencies that look like spam patterns and create avoidable compliance exposure. If you're running a cold calling team across time zones, you need rules that are automated, not remembered. Another frequent issue is trying to scale volume before verifying list quality. Bad data increases unanswered calls, short call durations, and negative engagement signals, all of which can damage reputation with carriers and analytics providers. Strong B2B list-building services and pre-call validation aren't ops overhead. They're what keep your dialer and numbers healthy. Finally, many teams underestimate how much consumer fear bleeds into B2B behavior. When 80% block unknown numbers and many later realize they missed legitimate calls, the bar for legitimacy is high. So unbranded caller ID, inconsistent calling patterns, and sloppy identification scripts will cost you connects even when you're targeting business lines. Optimization, monitoring, number strategy, and branded calling. Once the fundamentals are in place, optimize like a systems engineer. Monitor spam label incidents, answer rates by number, complaint indicators, and call outcome patterns by rep and by campaign. Then rotate and retire numbers intentionally rather than reactively, because just get new numbers is how organizations end up in a perpetual reputation rebuild. Branded calling and authenticated calling are where modern outbound sales agency programs increasingly separate from the pack. When your name and, where available, call reason shows up clearly, you're not just improving pickup, you're reducing the fear that drives the 74% I don't answer unknown numbers behavior. In practice, this is one of the cleanest ways to protect both compliance posture and conversion performance at the same time. QA is the other multiplier. A weekly cadence of call reviews, checking identification, opt-out handling, and accurate logging lets you correct issues before they become systemic. For SDR agencies and sales development agency teams, that feedback loop is the difference between we trained them once and we operate a compliant machine. Next steps: how to operationalize this without slowing growth. Treat this like a rollout, not a rewrite. Start by auditing how numbers are acquired, how consent is captured, how caller ID is configured, and how opt-outs flow or fail to flow across CRM, dialer, and reporting. You're looking for bypass points where humans can override rules and for data gaps where the system can't prove compliance later. Then lock the controls into your tooling. CRM-level consent and DNC fields, dialer enforcement, number registration and warm-up standards, and script requirements that force early identification and a clean opt-out path. If you're also running a cold email agency motion or LinkedIn outreach services, align suppression and messaging across channels so a prospect's preference is honored everywhere. If you don't have the internal bandwidth to build and maintain this, partnering can be the fastest path to a stable program. At SalesHive, we've been operating in high-volume outbound since 2016, booking 100,000-plus meetings for 1,500-plus B2B clients by combining trained SDRs with an outreach platform that supports compliant workflows, clean data, and strong number strategy, so teams can scale B2B sales outsourcing without reinventing the compliance wheel.